this hour on I-24 News.
But we cannot allow atrocities like that. Cannot allow it.
Chemical warfare. The president considers the U.S. response to the latest chemical attack in Syria. Plus, a warning from Iran. The country's president says the U.S. will regret it if it pulls out of the nuclear deal. And death toll rising. Violence continues on the Israeli-Gaza border as Hamas makes a promise to keep the protest going. And finally, Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill just ahead of hearings on Facebook's data security.
From the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clear Cut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Shayna Estulin in for Michelle McCory. Right now at the White House, President Trump is meeting with his military advisors. They're deciding how and when the United States will respond to the latest chemical attack in Syria. The U.S. says those banned weapons were used again in a rebel stronghold outside of Damascus on Saturday. It's a claim the Russians are denying. They're calling videos of the attack a hoax, and they said that at the United Nations today, where U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley was not buying it.
Pictures of dead children mean little to governments like Russia, who expend their own resources to prop up Assad. And this council, which saw these pictures last year, has failed to act because Russia has stood in its way every single time.
Meantime, Russia and Syria are blaming Israel for a strike against an airbase in that country. But the strike does not appear to be a response to the chemical attack. It is at the same facility Israel warplanes hit in February after Israel said an Iranian drone entered its airspace. Our correspondent Daniel Tzemach has those details.
A deadly strike in Syria, targeting a familiar base. Pre-dawn Monday morning, 2 Israeli F-15 fighter jets launched 8 missiles at the T4 military base near Homs in central Syria. 14 reportedly killed, including Iranian nationals. That's according to Syrian and Russian governments. Israel keeping characteristically quiet, not confirming responsibility. But Israel did confirm targeting this exact base in February after an Iranian drone breached Israeli territory. This attack comes on the heels of another attack. 48 hours prior, Syrian President Bashar Assad allegedly dropped chemical weapons on civilians in a rebel-held neighborhood, killing dozens. The party first accused was the U.S. While U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to respond, the U.S. officially denies carrying out the strike, since unnamed U.S. officials said off record that Washington had been informed in advance that Israel was going to strike, much to Russia's dismay.
The airstrikes must be investigated. Of course, this is a very dangerous development. I hope that, at the very least, this is understood by the military personnel, both American and those who are in one coalition with them.
In the past, Israel has notified Russia prior to striking in Syria, as Russia's presence on the ground makes coordination between the two countries a very delicate issue. Israel has reiterated time and time again that Iran's entrenchment in Syria crosses a red line. But Israel has not felt obligated to acknowledge alleged military activity in Syria in the past, and it doesn't seem to be interested in doing so now.
We have a simple and clear rule, and we make sure to give it permanent expression. Whoever comes to hurt you, you hurt him first.
Yes, simple and clear. Daniel Tzemach, I-24 News.
And let's go to our senior diplomatic correspondent, Nina Larson, who is in Washington, D.C. for us. Nina, just a week ago, President Trump said he wanted U.S. troops out of Syria. Now we're hearing a different story. Is that changing because of the chemical attack?
Well, it certainly appears so, Shayna. It seems that President Trump was horrified, like the rest of the world, at those images of suffering children in Douma over the weekend. And we've seen yet again that President Assad is prepared to show absolutely no mercy whatsoever in how he continues his campaign from the air and on the ground in Syria. Trump has been very vocal about his personal feelings about this and the prospects for a U.S. response. Let's take a listen to what he said in a cabinet meeting earlier today.
If it's Russia, if it's Syria, if it's Iran, if it's all of them together, we'll figure it out. He may, yeah, he may. And if he does, it's going to be very tough. Very tough.
U.S. military action, is it off the table as relates?
Nothing's off the table. Nothing's off the table.
Well, as you can see, Shayna, that Trump has lost patience even with Moscow over this. Everyone is pointing the finger at Russia, including Nikki Haley earlier today at the United Nations for backing the Assad regime and basically allowing this kind of attack to happen.
Right, and you're typically at the United Nations. What did she say? What did Nikki Haley say there today?
Well, she really took everybody to task, particularly Russia. She said this is a moment of reckoning for the United Nations to actually help the civilian population of Syria. She also put Russia very firmly on notice. And I'm quoting here, she used the phrase that Russia has the blood of Syrian children on its hands at this point. She wasn't alone. She was joined in the condemnation of this attack by colleagues on the Security Council from the UK and France and several other members. And behind the scenes, diplomatically, the phone lines have been burning up, Shayna, the last few days and hours. President Macron of France and President Trump have agreed on some kind of substantial and strong and joint response to all of this. And the United Kingdom, from the kind of statements we're seeing from their foreign minister and from Theresa May, seems also ready to act. So I would expect something of impact to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Right, and of course, Russia denying this all. Nina Larson, thank you as always. And now we're joined by Matthew RJ Brodsky, a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group, and Jonathan Cristol, a fellow at the World Policy Institute, who joins me here in studio. Matthew, I go to you first. The president is right now meeting with his military advisors. What options are they discussing, do you believe?
Well, I would imagine they're looking at a punitive action that's going to punish Assad, whether that's cruise missiles or airstrikes or something of the sort. I think it's important to separate out the three aspects, because in the past 24 hours there's been a lot of confusion between what foreign reports say that was an Israeli attack on the Tayas airbase in the center of Syria, between Trump saying that he would like to pull out or withdraw as soon as possible from Syria, and, of course, a response to the chemical weapons attack. What's very different about this situation, as opposed to the past, is that this now appears to be the use of a nerve agent as opposed to chlorine gas, which has been used for the past year since the last April attack of sarin gas in Khan Sheikhoun. So I think this has apparently risen to the level that he feels he needs to respond. Whether there's going to be a more robust challenge coming up, we'll have to see. But I do think it's very important to look at the fact that in that meeting he held out Iran, Russia, and Assad, basically the axis of resistance, as opposed to ISIS. And I think that's where he should be focusing.
Matthew, you say those three things are separate, but Jonathan, Senator John McCain said two of those things are tied together, the pulling out of the troops and the chemical attack. He essentially laid some of the blame on President Trump and said by pulling out, you're showing Syria the U.S. is weak and that Syria could basically do what they want.
Well, you know, it is sort of in my nature to criticize President Trump at every opportunity, but I'm not sure that that is actually a fair criticism in this case. I think that there may be an element of that Assad is certainly trying to test the United States and see what it is we will respond to, if the last response was a one-off thing or not. And maybe the timing was related to Trump's statements, but it also could have happened anyway and probably would have happened anyway.
Matthew, do you think one of the options that they are discussing or should discuss is letting Syrian refugees, more Syrian refugees, into the United States, especially when President Trump has dropped the quota to the lowest point in history?
I mean, I certainly don't weigh in on that side of the issue. I think the best way to deal with that is to have a more stable Syria and to have a place there that refugees can return to. And I think he would find that to be the best option. Unfortunately, the only way that happens is if there is some stabilizing force in Syria. And that means not just leaving it for Iran basically to take over the entire place or letting Russia have its way. So I think the United States, where it is in eastern Syria, that would be something to look at. There could also be safe zones created. But again, we're going to learn a lot in the next week or so, well beyond just the next 24 hours when he makes a decision on punitive action as to what direction he's leaning. With John Bolton coming in as the NSC director, you can see that there is a new sheriff, so to speak, in town, and I think we'll learn a lot.
Okay, so Matthew says there needs to be a stabilizing force. Is the U.S. prepared to be that stabilizing force, which would require troops, more troops going into Syria?
No, I mean, I don't think that we are prepared to do it. I don't think the administration is prepared to do it. And I don't think the American people are really in a place where they want another ongoing U.S. presence in another country in the Middle East. I do think that it's true that John Bolton coming in makes it a bit more likely that the U.S. might go that route. But I also think Bolton has his eyes set perhaps on other places. But sure, stability, a U.S.-led stable Syria would be the dream. But there are really, I think, no good options for us there. I think the best we can do, other than to provide support for refugees in Syria, in the region, and I think in this country as well, would be to perhaps stabilize the Kurdish region, to back up the Syrian Kurds, to hold territory against ISIS. But the reality is, you know, we sort of lost this to Assad years ago under the Obama administration, and there is not any real will to push too hard back on that.
Right. And then, Matthew, just quickly in the less than a minute we have, do you expect the response, though, to be stronger than what we saw a year ago, the missiles launched at Syrian regime targets after another chemical attack back then?
I certainly hope so. I mean, Israel's learned a long time ago that deterrence isn't a one-off event. It's an ongoing process in which you are constantly calibrating how the rules of engagement are working. And I don't think it's just a missile attack. When an enemy learns that that's all it was and they survived, they'll go about their business if they don't think that it's going to get worse. So this has to be stronger. I'm a big believer in punishing people who use chemical and biological weapons.
Right, and as we saw, Assad went about his business and reportedly attacked his own people again with a chemical weapon, aided by Russia, although, again, both sides are denying it. Matthew RJ Brodsky, a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group, and Jonathan Cristol, a fellow at the World Policy Institute. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming on our show.
Thank you.
And still ahead on Crossroads, President Trump touts a potential meeting with North Korea as very exciting for the world after the regime reportedly tells the U.S. it's ready to discuss denuclearization. And it's Trump against China. The president once again creating concern over a trade war, but promising the U.S. will be better off in the long run. Plus, Michael Cohen, the president's personal lawyer, under the microscope. The FBI just raided his office. We will talk about that with our senior national correspondent, Michael Shore.